Welcome to Fairy World. The Shepherd of Cloud and Sky. There was a shepherd named Thomas who lived in a small stone cottage at the edge of a valley where the hills rolled like waves and the grass grew thick and green. Thomas had always been a shepherd, just as his father had been, and his grandfather before that. Every morning he would wake with the sun, eat his simple breakfast of bread and cheese, and walk out to check on his flock of sheep that grazed in the meadow behind his cottage. But Thomas's sheep were not ordinary sheep, though he did not know this yet. He had acquired them in a strange way about 3 months earlier. Thomas had been walking through the market in the nearby town looking to buy a few new sheep to add to his small flock when he saw an old woman standing by the road. She had a cart with 7 sheep, and these sheep were the most beautiful he had ever seen. Their wool was pure white, so white it almost seemed to glow in the sunlight. Their eyes were calm and gentle, and they made soft sounds that were almost like music. The old woman had sold him all 7 sheep for a price that seemed too good to be true. She had smiled at him with a knowing look and said only, "Take good care of them, shepherd. They are special, these ones." Then she had disappeared into the crowd before Thomas could ask her what she meant. At first, Thomas thought the sheep were simply well-bred. Their wool was indeed the finest he had ever touched, softer than silk and lighter than down feathers. They were gentle creatures who never wandered far and always came when he called. They seemed to understand him in a way his other sheep never had. Sometimes he would talk to them as he sat in the meadow, telling them about his day or his thoughts, and they would gather around him as if listening to every word. But there were odd things about these sheep that Thomas could not quite explain. For one thing, they barely seemed to eat. He would watch them graze, but they would only nibble at the grass, never really consuming much. Yet they stayed plump and healthy, their wool growing thick and lustrous. For another thing, they were unusually light. When Thomas had to lift one to check its hooves or examine it for any injuries, he was always surprised by how little it weighed, as if it were made of something lighter than flesh and bone. And then there were the mornings when he would find them surrounded by mist, even when the rest of the meadow was clear. The fog would cling to them like a blanket, and when it lifted, the sheep would seem even whiter and more radiant than before. Thomas thought about these oddities sometimes, but he was a practical man who did not dwell too much on mysteries. He cared for his sheep, sheared their wool, and lived his quiet life. He had no family, few friends, and was content with his solitude and his work. The sheep were his companions, and that was enough. Everything changed on a night when the moon was full and bright. Thomas woke suddenly, in the darkness, though he did not know what had disturbed him. He lay in his bed, listening. Outside he heard a sound he had never heard before, a kind of humming or singing that seemed to come from the direction of the meadow. It was beautiful and strange, and it pulled at something deep inside him. He got out of bed, pulled on his clothes, and went outside. The night was clear, and the moon hung low and large in the sky, painting everything in silver light. Thomas walked toward the meadow, following the sound. As he drew closer, he saw something that made him stop and stare in wonder. His 7 special sheep were glowing, not just their white wool catching the moonlight, but truly glowing, as if lit from within, and they were not standing on the ground. They were floating, hovering about a foot above the grass, and the humming sound was coming from them. Thomas rubbed his eyes, certain he must be dreaming. But when he looked again, the sheep were still there, still floating, still glowing, still singing their strange wordless song. As he watched, the sheep began to rise higher. Slowly at first, then faster, they floated up into the air, their wool rippling in a wind that Thomas could not feel. They were leaving. They were flying away into the night sky. "Wait!" Thomas called out, finding his voice at last. "Wait, come back." The sheep paused in their ascent. They turned in the air, looking down at him with their gentle eyes. And then something even stranger happened. The largest of the 7 sheep, the one Thomas had named Cloud for her especially fluffy wool, descended back down to him. She landed lightly on the ground and looked at him with an expression that was almost human in its intelligence. Thomas knelt down beside her, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch her wool. It felt different now, even lighter than before, almost insubstantial, like touching mist or fog. "What are you?" he whispered. Cloud made a soft sound, and then, to Thomas's astonishment, she spoke. Her voice was gentle and airy, like wind through leaves. "We are Cloud sheep, shepherd. We come from the sky meadows, far above the earth, where the immortals tend to us, and we graze on sunbeams and drink from rain before it falls." Thomas sat back on the grass, too amazed to stand. "You can talk?" "Tonight we can," Cloud said. "The full moon gives us this gift when we are in our true forms. We have been trapped here on earth, unable to return home. But tonight, the moon is strong enough that we can make the journey back." "Trapped," Thomas said. "But how? Why?" Cloud looked up at the 6 other sheep floating above. 3 months ago, there was a great storm in the sky meadows. The wind was so strong it tore open a hole between your world and ours. We were caught in the winds and pulled through, falling down and down until we landed here. We took on these heavier forms to survive on earth, but we have always longed to return home. Thomas felt a strange ache in his chest. He had grown fond of these sheep, perhaps more fond than he had realized. "So, you're leaving now?" "We must," Cloud said. "We do not belong here. But, shepherd, we want you to know that you have been kind to us. You have cared for us with gentleness and love, and we are grateful." Thomas nodded slowly. He wanted to ask them to stay, but he knew that would be selfish. If they belonged in the sky, then they should return there. "I will miss you," he said simply. Cloud stepped closer to him and touched her nose to his hand. "There's another way," she said softly. "You could come with us." "What?" Thomas looked up at the glowing sheep in confusion. "Come with you to the sky. But I am not a cloud sheep. I am just a man." "The sky meadows need a shepherd," Cloud explained. "Our herder, the one who has tended us for centuries, has grown old even by immortal standards. He wishes to rest, to fade into the sunset, and become part of the sky itself. He has been waiting for someone to take his place. When we fell to earth and you found us, he wondered if perhaps fate had chosen you." Thomas shook his head. "But I cannot fly. I cannot live in the sky." "If you come with us, you will be transformed," Cloud said. "You will become like the sky herder, immortal and eternal, able to walk on clouds and tend the flocks that bring rain and snow and soft breezes to the world below. You will never age, never die, never want for anything, It is a good life, shepherd, peaceful and full of purpose. Thomas looked up at the sky, at the moon and the stars and the vast darkness between them. He tried to imagine himself up there, walking on clouds, tending to magical sheep, living forever. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream or a story told to children. "I do not know," he said. "This is my home. I have lived here all my life. Everything I know is here." Cloud nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You do not have to decide now. Come with us tonight, just to see the sky meadows. Meet the old herder. See what the life is like. Then, when the moon is full again in 1 month, we will return to this spot. If you wish to stay in the sky, you can remain with us. If you wish to return to earth, we will bring you back, and you will never see us again. Does that seem fair?" Thomas considered this. The practical part of him said it was madness, that he should let the sheep go and return to his bed and his normal life. But another part of him, a part he had not listened to in many years, was curious and excited and yearning for something he could not name. "All right," he said at last. "I will come and see." Cloud made a happy sound, and the other 6 sheep descended from the sky, surrounding Thomas. He stood up, and they pressed close to him, their glowing wool wrapping around him like a cocoon. He felt a strange tingling sensation, and then the ground disappeared from beneath his feet. They were flying. Thomas wanted to cry out in fear, but the sensation was not frightening. It was gentle, like being lifted by a warm breeze. The sheep rose higher and higher, carrying him with them, and Thomas watched as his cottage and his meadow and his valley grew smaller and smaller below. The earth spread out beneath him like a patchwork quilt, fields and forests and rivers all laid out in the moonlight. Up and up they went, past the clouds, past the place where the air grew thin, past the realm where birds could fly. Thomas should have been cold, should have been unable to breathe, but the glowing wool of the cloud sheep protected him, keeping him warm and safe. And then, quite suddenly, they passed through something like a veil or a curtain, and everything changed. The darkness gave way to soft light like perpetual dawn. The air was warm and sweet, smelling of flowers and rain, and stretching out in all directions were meadows made of clouds, solid enough to walk on, but soft and billowing. The sky was shades of pink and gold and lavender, colors that shifted and changed like watercolors running together. The sheep landed gently on the cloud meadow, and Thomas found himself standing on ground that felt like the softest wool. He took a few tentative steps, marveling at the way the clouds held his weight. "Welcome to the sky meadows," Cloud said. Thomas turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. In the distance, he could see other flocks of cloud sheep grazing on what appeared to be sunbeams that grew from the clouds like grass. There were structures, too, buildings made of mist and light, bridges that arced between cloud islands, waterfalls of rain that fell upward into the sky. "This is impossible," Thomas whispered. "This cannot be real." "It is as real as your world below," Cloud said, "just different." A figure was approaching them across the meadow. As it drew closer, Thomas saw it was a man, or something like a man. He was tall and thin, with long silver hair and eyes that were the blue of a summer sky. He wore robes that seemed to be made of morning mist, and he carried a staff of twisted light. Despite his silver hair, his face was unlined, ageless, beautiful in a way that was almost hard to look at. "Welcome," Thomas of the Valley, the figure said. His voice was deep and resonant, like distant thunder. I am Aldrich, herder of the sky meadows. I have been tending these flocks for longer than your civilization has existed. Thomas tried to bow, feeling that this being deserved some form of respect, but Aldrich waved his hand. No need for that, Aldrich said kindly. Come, walk with me. Let me show you what I do, what you might do, if you choose to stay. Thomas followed Aldrich across the cloud meadow with his 7 sheep trailing behind them. As they walked, Aldrich explained the nature of the sky meadows and the cloud sheep. The sheep, he said, were not truly animals, but rather spirits of weather and atmosphere given form. They grazed on light and air, and their wool was not wool at all, but condensed clouds. When the flocks were sheared, their wool was gathered and sent down to the world below, where it became the clouds that drifted across mortal skies. Rain sheep produced clouds that brought gentle rains. Snow sheep made the clouds that brought winter storms. Wind sheep created the billowing formations that carried fresh breezes. We are the shepherds of weather, Aldrich explained. We tend the flocks, guide them, shear them at the right times, and send their wool down to water the earth and bring the seasons. It is an old magic, older than the gods themselves. It is the fundamental work that keeps the world turning. And you do this alone? Thomas asked. For many years now, yes, Aldrich said. There were once many sky herders, dozens of us working together. But one by one, they have chosen to fade, to become part of the sky itself. It is the way of our kind. We are immortal, but not eternal. Eventually, even we grow tired and wish to rest. I am the last, and I too am ready to sleep. They came to a flock of sheep that were not white but pale blue, like ice. These, Aldrich explained, were the snow sheep. Thomas watched as Aldrich approached them, speaking to them in a language of soft sounds and gentle gestures. The sheep responded, gathering around him peacefully as he examined them, checking their hooves and their wool. Do you love this work? Thomas asked. Aldrich paused and looked at him with those ageless eyes. Love? I do not know that word means the same thing to me as it does to you. I have done this work for so long that it is simply what I am. But yes, I suppose I do love it. I love the sheep, each one with its own personality and quirks. I love the way the weather dances across the world below when I send down the clouds. I love the knowledge that I am part of something important, something that sustains life. He reached out and ran his hand along the back of one of the snow sheep. But I am tired, Thomas, so very tired. I have lived through the rise and fall of empires, through ages of ice and ages of warmth. I have seen everything there is to see, done everything there is to do. I am ready to rest. Thomas felt a strange sympathy for this ancient being. What happens when you fade? Who will tend the sheep? That is why I hoped you might come, Aldrich said. When Cloud and the others fell to your world, I looked down through the veil and watched to see who would find them. I saw you take them in, care for them with kindness, even though you did not know what they truly were. I saw that you had the heart of a true shepherd, and I thought perhaps you might be the one to take my place. But I am just a mortal man, Thomas protested. I know nothing of magic or immortality or tending to weather spirits. You would be transformed, Aldrich said. If you choose to stay past the next full moon, the sky meadows will change you. You will become as I am, immortal and ageless, able to speak with the sheep and command the clouds. You will have all the knowledge you need, given to you by the meadows themselves. And you will have time, endless time, to learn and grow into the role. They walked in silence for a while, passing other flocks. Thomas saw sheep in every shade and color, each one beautiful in its own way. He saw rain sheep that were gray and soft, wind sheep that were nearly transparent, storm sheep that crackled with tiny lightning bolts in their wool. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said finally. "Of course." "Do you regret it? Becoming a sky herder? Do you wish you had lived a normal mortal life instead?" Aldrich was quiet for a long time, considering the question. "There were moments," he said slowly, "especially in the early years, when I missed mortal things. I missed the taste of food, the feel of solid ground beneath my feet, the way the seasons changed in a mortal life. I missed knowing that my time was limited, that each moment was precious because there were only so many of them. Immortality can make you lazy, you see. When you have forever, it is easy to put things off, to forget that anything matters." "That does not sound like you are recommending it," Thomas said. Aldrich smiled, and it transformed his face, making him seem suddenly warm and human. "But I learned to find new kinds of meaning. I learned to appreciate each sheep as an individual, each storm as a unique creation. I found purpose in the work itself, in the knowledge that without me, the world below would suffer. And I learned to love the sky, the endless space and freedom, the beauty of sunrise and sunset seen from above. It was a good life, Thomas, different from a mortal life, but good in its own way." They returned to where Cloud and the others waited. The 7 sheep looked at Thomas expectantly, as if they too wanted to know what he would decide. "You do not have to choose now," Aldrich reminded him. "Stay here for a while. Let me teach you what I know. Experience this life. When the moon is full again, then you can decide." Thomas nodded. "All right, I will stay and learn." And so began the strangest month of Thomas's life. Each day, and there were days in the sky meadows, though they did not quite match the days on earth below, Aldrich taught Thomas the art of sky herding. He learned to speak the wordless language of the cloud sheep, a communication made of gestures and intentions rather than sounds. He learned to feel the moods of different flocks, to sense when they needed to graze or rest or be sheared. He learned to card and comb the cloud wool, gathering it into proper formations before sending it down to the world below. It was harder work than Thomas had expected. The sheep might be spirits, but they had all the stubbornness and individuality of mortal animals. The rain sheep were gentle but timid and needed constant reassurance. The wind sheep were playful and would dart away if you did not keep a firm hand. The storm sheep were temperamental and would spark with lightning if they became annoyed. But Thomas found he had a gift for it. Perhaps it was his years of tending mortal sheep, or perhaps it was something deeper, some natural affinity for the work. The cloud sheep responded to him, trusting him, following his guidance. Even the difficult storm sheep would calm when he approached them. Aldrich watched his progress with approval. "You have the touch," he said one day, as Thomas successfully gathered a scattered flock of wind sheep. "Better than I did when I first came here. You might actually be quite good at this." Thomas felt a surge of pride at the praise. He was surprised to find that he enjoyed the work, enjoyed it more than he had enjoyed anything in a long time. There was something deeply satisfying about tending these magical creatures, about being part of the great cycle that brought weather to the world. But there were also moments of doubt, moments when he would look down through the clouds at the earth below and think about his cottage, his valley, his simple mortal life. Was he really prepared to give all that up? To live forever in the sky, never again to walk on solid ground or eat a meal or feel winter's cold or summer's heat? One night, as he sat on the edge of a cloud island with his feet dangling over the vast drop to earth below, Cloud came and settled beside him. "You are troubled," she said. The full moon was not yet come again, but here in the sky meadows the cloud sheep could speak whenever they wished. "I am confused," Thomas admitted. "Part of me wants to stay here. I love the work, I love the sheep, I love the beauty of this place. But part of me feels like I would be abandoning something important if I do not return to Earth." "What would you be abandoning?" Cloud asked gently. Thomas thought about it. "My home, my life, the world I know." "But what is in that world for you?" Cloud pressed. "You have no family, no close friends. You live alone in your cottage with your sheep. Is that so different from living alone here in the sky with us?" "It is mortal," Thomas said. "It is real." "This is also real," Cloud said. "Just because something is different does not make it less real. And as for being mortal, is that truly so important to you? You would grow old on earth, your body would fail, and one day you would die. Here, you would live forever, young and strong, doing work that matters." Thomas shook his head. "I do not know if I want to live forever. There is something about mortality that gives life meaning. Knowing that it will end makes each moment matter more." Cloud was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps," she said, "but you could also say that immortality allows you to appreciate things more deeply. You would have time to truly understand the sheep, to master every aspect of the work, to see patterns and changes that mortals could never perceive. There is meaning in that too." "You sound like you're trying to convince me to stay," Thomas said with a slight smile. "I am," Cloud admitted. "We have grown fond of you, Thomas. The other sheep and I, we hope you will choose to stay. But more than that, the meadows need you. If you leave, Aldrich will fade, and there will be no one to tend the flocks. The weather will become chaotic, and the world below will suffer." Thomas felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. "That is not fair," he said quietly, "to make my decision a matter of whether people live or die." "No," Cloud agreed. "It is not fair, but it is true nonetheless." They sat in silence for a while, looking down at the world below. From this height, Thomas could see the curve of the earth, the great oceans and continents spread out like a map. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. As the days passed and the moon grew fuller, Thomas threw himself into learning everything Aldrich could teach him. He learned to sense the patterns of weather, to know when the earth below needed rain or wind or snow. He learned to coordinate the flocks, sending different types of cloud sheep to different regions at the right times. He learned to read the signs in the sky, the subtle shifts in light and air that indicated changes coming. And he grew close to the sheep, not just his original 7, but all the flocks of the sky meadows. He learned their individual personalities, their quirks and preferences. There was Nimbus, a range sheep who was particularly gentle and loved to be scratched behind the ears. There was Gale, a wind sheep who was playful and mischievous and would steal Thomas's shepherd's crook if he set it down. There was Thunder, a storm sheep who was gruff and standoffish, but who Thomas discovered had a soft spot for cloudy days when the work was slow. He also spent time with Aldrich, listening to the old sky herder's stories. Aldrich told him about the early days of the world, when the sky and earth were still young, and the gods walked among mortals. He told him about the great storms that had shaped history, the droughts and floods and blizzards that had risen and fallen empires. He spoke of the other sky herders he had known, their personalities and their fates. Did any of them ever regret becoming immortal? Thomas asked one day. Aldrich considered. There was one, a woman named Lyra. She had been a shepherdess in life like you. She took to the work quickly and seemed happy for many years. But after a few centuries, she began to long for mortal things. She missed growing old, missed the feeling of moving through life stages. She missed the idea of ending. What happened to her? She made a choice that is rarely made, Aldrich said. She gave up her immortality and returned to Earth. But it came at a cost. She could not become truly mortal again. She was something in between, neither immortal nor mortal. She aged slowly, over centuries rather than decades, and she could no longer quite fit in with mortal people. Last I heard, she was living in a forest somewhere, alone and apart from both worlds. Thomas felt a chill. That sounds like a terrible fate. It was her choice, Aldrich said. But yes, I think she regretted it in the end. The lesson is this, Thomas. Once you make your choice, there is no going back. If you choose to stay and become immortal, you cannot later change your mind and return to mortal life. And if you choose to return to Earth, you cannot come back here. The Sky Meadows allow only one chance. The weight of the decision pressed down on Thomas even more heavily. One choice, irrevocable, that would determine the entire course of his existence. The night before the full moon, Thomas could not sleep. He wandered the cloud meadows, visiting the various flocks, saying what might be his goodbyes to each of them. The sheep seemed to sense his turmoil, and they gathered around him, offering their silent support. He found himself at a place Aldrich had shown him, a spot where the clouds were thin enough to see clearly down to earth. Thomas knelt and looked down, searching for his valley, his cottage. It took a while, but he finally found it, a tiny speck far below. From this height, it looked so small, so insignificant. "Tomorrow you must choose," a voice said behind him. Thomas turned to see Aldrich approaching. The old sky herder looked different somehow, as if he were already beginning to fade. His form was slightly translucent, his edges blurred. "I do not know what to choose," Thomas said honestly. Aldrich sat down beside him. "Let me tell you something, Thomas. When I first came here, I was not a shepherd. I was a soldier, a warrior from an age long forgotten. I knew nothing of tending animals or caring for gentler things. I was chosen not because of my skills, but because of my heart. The Sky Meadows saw in me something I did not see in myself." "What did they see?" Thomas asked. "A capacity for peace," Aldrich said. "A desire to put down the sword and pick up the shepherd's crook. The work changed me, Thomas. It made me into someone better than I had been. It gave me purpose and meaning that war never could." He looked at Thomas with those ancient eyes. I see something in you too. You are a man who has lived alone, who has kept himself apart from the world. Not because you dislike people, but because you have never quite felt like you belonged. You have been waiting, though you might not have known it, for something to give your life meaning beyond mere survival. Thomas felt tears prick at his eyes because the words were true. He had always felt apart, separate, like he was watching life from a distance rather than participating in it. The question you must ask yourself, Aldrich continued, is not whether you will miss your mortal life. You will, sometimes. The question is, where do you belong? Where is your true home? Is it in that tiny cottage below, living out your brief years alone and forgotten? Or is it here, among the clouds, tending to the flocks that sustain the world, doing work that matters? I wish I knew, Thomas whispered. Then let me help you, Aldrich said. He reached out and placed his hand on Thomas's head. Close your eyes. Thomas closed his eyes, and suddenly he was seeing visions. He saw himself back in his cottage, growing old, his body failing, spending his last days alone with no one to mourn him when he died. He saw his cottage fall into disrepair after his death, the meadow growing wild, all trace of his existence slowly erased. But then the vision shifted. He saw himself here in the sky meadows, young and strong, tending the flocks. He saw himself growing into the role, becoming wise and skilled. He saw centuries pass, the world below changing and evolving, but he remained a constant presence, a guardian of weather and seasons. He saw the sheep thriving under his care, saw the earth below flourishing because of the careful attention he paid to the patterns of rain and wind. And he saw something else, something Aldrich perhaps had not intended to show him. He saw himself occasionally lonely, longing for companionship, for someone to share the work and the beauty with. But he also saw himself at peace, content with his purpose, finding joy in the small moments, in a lamb's first steps, in a perfectly formed cloud, in the satisfaction of a job well done. When the visions faded and Thomas opened his eyes, Aldrich was already fading too, becoming more translucent. The moon rises, Aldrich said softly. It is time. What is your choice, Thomas? Thomas stood up and looked around at the sky meadows, at the flocks of cloud sheep scattered across the clouds, at the eternal sky that stretched in all directions. He thought about the work, the responsibility, the immortality. He thought about his cottage, his valley, his mortal life, and he realized that the choice was not really a choice at all. He had already decided, perhaps, from the moment Cloud had first invited him to come and see. The mortal world had never quite been his home. He had always been waiting for this, for a place where he truly belonged. I will stay, Thomas said. I will be the next sky herder. Aldrich smiled, and it was a smile of pure relief and joy. Then it is done. The clouds beneath Thomas's feet began to glow. Light rose up around him, warm and gentle, wrapping him in a cocoon of radiance. He felt his body changing, becoming lighter, becoming something more than merely human. The aches and pains of his mortal life faded away. He felt strong, vigorous, filled with energy that would never deplete. Knowledge flooded into him, all of Aldrich's accumulated wisdom, all the secrets of sky herding, all the patterns and rhythms of weather and seasons. It was overwhelming at first, but then it settled into place, becoming part of him, as natural as breathing. When the light faded, Thomas looked down at himself. His clothes had transformed into robes, like Aldrich's, made of morning mist and soft light. His hands were smooth and ageless. He felt different, felt like himself, but also like something more. Aldrich was almost completely transparent now. "Take care of them," he said, his voice fading. "The sheep, the meadows, the world below. You are the guardian now." "I will," Thomas promised. "Thank you, Aldrich. Thank you for everything." Aldrich smiled one last time, and then he faded away completely, dissolving into the sky like mist in sunlight. Thomas stood alone, the new sky herder, the shepherd of clouds and weather. Cloud and the others came to him, the 7 sheep who had started it all. They gathered around him, and Cloud spoke. "Welcome home, shepherd." Thomas knelt and embraced them, these strange magical creatures who had changed his life forever. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for finding me, for bringing me here." The full moon rose over the sky meadows, and Thomas stood and looked out at the flocks that were now his responsibility. There were hundreds of sheep, thousands perhaps, all depending on him. It should have been terrifying, but instead, Thomas felt a deep sense of rightness, of purpose. He picked up the shepherd's crook that had appeared in his hand, the tool of his new trade, and he walked out into the meadows to begin his work. Years passed in the world below, though Thomas did not count them. Seasons came and went, civilizations rose and fell, the face of the earth changed in countless small and large ways. But in the sky meadows, Thomas tended his flocks and sent the weather down to sustain the world. He learned the rhythms of his work, the careful balance needed to provide enough rain, but not too much, enough wind, but not too strong. He learned to read the needs of the earth below, to sense when crops were failing and needed water, when forests were too dry and needed storms, when people needed gentle breezes to cool them or snow to water them through the winter. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he would think about his old life, about the cottage that was surely long gone by now, about the valley he had once called home. He felt a faint nostalgia, but no regret. This was where he belonged, where he had always belonged. The sheep became his family, his companions in the endless work. He knew each one by name and personality. He watched generations of cloud sheep be born and eventually fade back into the sky, and he mourned each one but also celebrated the new lambs that took their place. Cloud, who had first spoken to him, became his closest friend. She was the leader of the flocks now, helping Thomas coordinate the movements of hundreds of sheep. They would often sit together at the edge of the clouds, looking down at the world, talking about everything and nothing. "Do you ever wish you had made a different choice?" Cloud asked him once, many years after he had become the sky herder. Thomas considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had chosen differently. But wish I had? No. This is my life, Cloud. This is who I am meant to be." One day, or perhaps one night, time being somewhat fluid in the sky meadows, Thomas saw something that made him pause in his work. Down below, in what had once been his valley, a person was standing in a meadow, looking up at the sky. It was a young woman, and she had a small flock of sheep around her, and something about the way she stood, the way she watched the clouds, reminded Thomas of himself all those years ago. He watched her for a while, curious. She seemed different from other mortals he observed, more aware somehow, more attuned to the world around her. Her sheep, too, seemed unusual. They were particularly white and fluffy, and they moved with a grace that was not quite natural. Thomas felt a stirring of recognition. He called Cloud to him and pointed down at the young shepherdess. "Look there. What do you see?" Cloud looked down and made a soft sound of surprise. "Those are cloud sheep, a small flock, newly fallen. There was a storm last week, a wild one that tore open the veil. Some sheep must have fallen through." Thomas smiled. The cycle continued, as it always did. "Should we bring them back?" Cloud looked at him thoughtfully. "Or we could wait and see what happens. If she is kind to them, if she has the heart of a true shepherd, perhaps in a month when the moon is full, we should visit her. The sky meadows will not have need of a new herder for many centuries yet, but it would be good to have help, would it not? To have a companion in the work." Thomas considered this. The thought of having another sky herder, someone to share the work and the wonders with, was appealing. The loneliness he sometimes felt might finally be eased. "Yes," he said, "let us watch her and see. If she has the gift, we will offer her the choice, as it was once offered to me." And so Thomas continued his work, tending the flocks, sending weather down to the world below, watching over the earth from his home in the sky. He was content, fulfilled, at peace with the choice he had made. The mortal world went on without him, as it always would. But the clouds still drifted across the sky, the rain still fell when needed, the wind still blew gentle and strong by turns, and high above, in the meadows that existed between earth and heaven, a shepherd tended his flock and kept the world turning. Thomas had found his home, his purpose, his place in the great pattern of things. He was no longer just a simple shepherd from a valley. He was something more, something eternal, a guardian of the boundary between sky and earth. And he would remain so for as long as the world needed weather, for as long as the clouds needed tending, for as long as there were sheep in the sky meadows who needed a shepherd's care. The end.